Hey YouTube, it's Matthew Decker with Leveraged Wealth Management. Today, I want to give you a fixed solution for the problem of inflation. So inflation is not a new problem. As you well know, inflation's been around forever, but the problem of inflation, specifically around retirement income, is different now than it has been in the last several years. And one of the main reasons is the impact that coronavirus has had on our economy, on our spending, and the fact that we've essentially been printing money for the last decade. So what I want to do in this video is just kind of outline the problem where we are now, and then give you one way to solve this problem that I think is probably the most efficient way to solve the problem of inflation as it relates to your retirement income. So I'm going to share my screen and we're just going to talk about where we are right now from the standpoint of inflation. And so I've pulled together a chart here that you can see. And for the longest time, between 1990, let's call it, and the late 2018, 2019, inflation was under 4%, essentially all of those years. So we've got our 4% marker, and you can see that all these years inflation is under 4%. Then we get to 2020, and where are we? North of 6%. And you could argue that these figures are underreported because, as you know, when our government reports things like inflation, oftentimes they will manipulate what they include in the data set in order to make inflation seem less scary than it really is. And so they'll take things out of the inflation calculation that have experienced significant price increases. And so you can argue the accuracy of inflation-based numbers, but I think that for the purpose of this conversation, these numbers will work just fine. And so we start with this problem of, okay, we've got over 6% inflation here in 2020, 2021, and it doesn't really look like that problem is going to slow down. In fact, if anything, it looks like the problem of inflation might accelerate as we continue to print more and more money and we see the cost of goods rise, especially coupled with a crippled supply chain. There's just simply less to go around, and so what is around is going to cost more. Now, in a normal environment, the problem of inflation would be solved from a retirement standpoint, would be solved with fixed instruments. But when the inflation numbers start creeping up over 4% or 4.5%, it gets very difficult to deal with inflation. And let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. So I've pulled this chart of the 20-year high quality market corporate bond rates, the spot rates. And so, if we basically highlight the same time period here, 2018 back and through, so this is only a 10-year chart, but we highlight back and you can see that this 20-year bond rate, for the most part, has been above 4% until recently. Now we're hovering just barely over 3%. And again, this is the corporate bond rate, which is not nearly as safe as treasuries would be. So the problem here is relatively simple. If the corporate bond, the 20-year corporate bond rates look like this chart, trending in the downward direction, and yet we go to our inflation numbers, and it seems as though they're going to trend in an upward direction, how in the world do you deal with this problem of inflation as it relates to your retirement income? And we could make it worse, if we want to look at CD rates. There's essentially no yield that you can earn on CD rates. This is just a quick search that we did just to see, what's out there. I'm sure you could find something better than this, but a 5-year at 1% was the down and dirty, search that we could find on local banks in our area. If you look at the treasuries, you got to go out to essentially a 30-year treasury to get over 2%, or a 20-year will get you over 2%. And if you look at money markets, they're paying absolutely nothing, less than 1%, and in a lot of cases, less than 50 basis points. So this problem's not going away. And when we look at inflation above 6 and bond rates barely above 3, The question that I have to ask is, if you're planning for retirement and you are at all concerned about safety and security, how do you have income that increases with inflation when the yields on fixed instruments are well pacing behind the rate of inflation? And it's a problem that's extremely difficult to solve. One of the ways that we have begun solving this problem is by using indexed universal life insurance policies. Now, you've probably watched some videos on this channel, and so you know that we're huge proponents of indexed universal life insurance policies as long as they're properly structured. If you're new to indexed universal life, this is probably not the video for you. You should start with some of the other videos that we've done that outline the risks associated with indexed universal life, that outline some of the fees, how you access your money, and how you properly design those policies. I'll link those in the comments below. You should start there. If you're relatively familiar with indexed universal life, continue watching this video because we're going to show you exactly why we think this is a really good way to solve the problem of increasing inflation and yet still being able to take some risk off the table with the use of a fixed instrument. And indexed universal life is a fixed instrument. In fact, a lot of companies even call it an FIUL, fixed indexed universal life. And so let me show you exactly what we're talking about. So there's a really cool tool that we like to use, and it's called a back casting tool or a back testing tool. And essentially what it's going to do is you get to pick the index options on the life insurance policy that you want to use. And then you basically look back in time. So this is going back to 2004, and it's going to run a scenario every single day that the stock market was open back through June of 2004 until the end of 2020. And it's going to group all those possible data points together and come up with the likelihood of achieving a 6% rate of return or whatever number that we want to put in there. And the results are pretty telling. So when we do look at this past performance, again, buying an index universal life insurance policy every day that the stock market was open going back to June of 2004, we find that there's a historical likelihood of hitting the 0% floor, because again, 0 is the worst that you can do in these policies, about 7% of the time. So about 7% of the data points are going to achieve a 0% rate of return in any given year. 78% of the possible data points credit greater than or equal to 3%, and 61% of the possible data points buying a policy every single day the market was open back to 2004, 61% of those data points achieve a 6% or greater index rate in any given year. Which leaves me with a very simple and straightforward question. When we look at the corporate bond rates, the 20-year high-quality market corporate bond rates, barely over 3%, let's set aside fees inside a life insurance policy just for a second. Would you rather take a bond paying around 3%, pretty continually, knowing that you're not going to outpace inflation because inflation's at 6 and your bond's at 3? Or would you rather take a little bit more risk, knowing that 7% of the time you're not going to get any credit, but 61% of the time you're going to outpace inflation? And of course, fees aside, that answer is simple. You take the 6%, 61% of the time, because it actually gives you a chance to outpace inflation. If you're sitting at a 3% rate of return for 20 years and inflation is anywhere between 3 and 8, you are going backwards and you have no chance of outpacing inflation. In fact, you've guaranteed yourself that you won't, assuming inflation stays anywhere close to where it is now. You at least give yourself a chance here in a fixed instrument that takes slightly more risk because you're not guaranteed that 3% rate that you might be quote unquote guaranteed in the bond. It's not a true guarantee. That bond could be worthless, but you give yourself a chance here. And if we go down further, this is where it gets really interesting. So instead of just looking at 1 year in time, all those data points and what's the probability of 1 year achieving these rates, what about if we block off 5, 10, and 15-year periods. And we say, okay, well, over a 5-year stretch, what is the chance that any 5-year stretch achieved a 6% rate of return or better? And 90% of the 5-year stretches achieved a 6% rate of return or better using these two index options. If you block any 10-year period of time or any 15-year period of time, 100% of the 10-year and 15-year rolling periods achieved a 6% rate of return or better, going back to 2004, buying a policy every single day that the market was open using these two index options. And so we have just discovered a vehicle that allows you to take risk off the table. You don't have to subject yourself to market negative performance risk in order to try to outpace the rate of inflation. We've just discovered a fixed vehicle that actually can produce returns over and above the rate of inflation without taking necessary risk, or excess risk would probably be a better way to say that. So this all looks good, on the surface and on paper. But again, I said, let's take fees off the table, because these policies, these life insurance policies, have fees. And so once you add in the fees, does it still make sense? Well, we think that it does. And so what I'd like to show you is just a sample that we did for a client recently here, where we decided, hey, let's pay $55,000 a year into this policy. So this is an asset reallocation play. There's a relatively large portfolio that's involved, around $3 million, and we are repositioning $715,000 of that $3 million into this vehicle to try and solve the problem of inflation without having to take excess risk. So again, if you're new to Index Universal Life Insurance, this is probably not the video for you, because we're not going to go into the specific design and structure of this policy. If you'd like to learn more about properly designing and structuring a policy, you need to check out some of the other videos that, again, we will link below. But in this example, what I want to point out to you is that this $55,000, 13-year payment is simply repositioning assets that were in the market into a fixed instrument in order to generate tax-free income that keeps pace with inflation. Now, the goal was to get around $90,000 a year of inflation-adjusted tax-free income, and so we actually worked backwards. We knew we were shooting for 90, and this is how much we needed in order to make it work. And so here we go. At age 62, we're generating $90,000 a year, indexed for inflation at 2.25% for life. And this income is all income tax-free and non-reportable to the IRS. And you can see that we start at $90,000, and at life expectancy, let's call it 93, or maybe 90 is where we stopped it. We're taking $179,000 tax-free with no market risk at age 90. And it's the same, it spends like 90, right? If inflation is at 2.25, it spends like it's 90. And we still have $1 million left over in the form of a death benefit. Now, could we have indexed this inflation at 6%? Yes, we could have. And it would have simply taken more than $715,000 to get the same $90,000 indexed for inflation for life. But the point is, if you're getting close to retirement, you're probably thinking about taking some risk off the table, because the one thing that you can't control is what the market's going to do. And the market timing has a huge impact on your ability to retire when and how you want. And there's tons of studies that show that early market losses in retirement result in people typically running out of money. And so as people approach retirement, and as you approach retirement, naturally you're going to begin to try to get less risky with your investments because the accumulation phase is ending and you are approaching the distribution phase. And as you approach the distribution phase, naturally you're going to want to take less risk in order to reduce the volatility in your portfolio. And this is an almost perfect way to do that, assuming that you're a healthy individual who's earning a decent amount of money, who has enough time to make this type of policy work. So in the example that we just looked at, this was a 44-year-old male. So we have time to make this work. If you're 70 years old and you need income in 2 years, this isn't a solution for you. And anybody that tries to say that it is lying to you. But if you have time to make it work, and if you have money to deploy, and you are conscious about taking risk off the table, de-risking your portfolio to generate income, and then best of all, it's indexed for inflation and tax-free, the index life policy is by far the best way to accomplish those two goals: indexing income for inflation, and it's non-reportable, non-taxable, which is perfect for high income earners. So if you'd like to book a discovery call with us to explore this in more detail, you can do so by either clicking on the link below this video or the little card here at the top of the screen. Or you can go straight to our website, leveragewm.com/contact-us. You can set up a short 15 to 30 minute discovery call where we just get a feel for what you're trying to do, what your goals are, and ultimately try to figure out if we can help you achieve those goals or not. But if you are concerned about the problem of inflation, which most people should be, because we haven't seen inflation numbers like this in a long time, and you're trying to deal with the problem of inflation in a safe and secure way, my opinion is the Index Universal Life Insurance Policy is the best way to do that. Unless you want to be a landlord or start investing in real estate. That could also be another way to do that. But as someone who owns real estate, I find it interesting and comical that of the 99 people who mention real estate in the comments, only one of them will actually own cash flowing real estate. And those of you that own cash flowing real estate are probably smiling because you know that that's true. But if you're not looking to be a landlord, or you haven't already dipped your toe in the water in real estate, I think this is the best way to solve that problem. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Book that discovery call with us if this is something that you want to explore. And until next time, take care.